In the pre-dawn darkness of the Amazon basin, when mist rises like ancient prayers from waters older than human memory, the forest exhales secrets that have waited centuries to be heard. Here, where the Tapajos meets the Amazon's muddy embrace, shafts of golden light pierce through a cathedral of cecropier and Brazil nut trees, illuminating droplets that seem to carry whispers from another age. The air itself feels weighted with history, thick, humid, alive with the endless cycling of death and rebirth. Every breath tastes of decomposing leaves, flowering vines, and something else, ... Something that speaks of stone beneath soil, of paths where no paths should be, of geometries hidden beneath nature's apparent chaos. As the sun climbs higher, the forest awakens with a symphony that has played for millennia. Howler monkeys announce the dawn as their ancestors did when great cities still flourished beneath this green canopy. Parrots streak through corridors of mahogany and fig trees that may have shaded plazas and ceremonial grounds lost to time. But listen closely to the forest's morning song. Between the calls of the tinamou and the rustle of palm fronds, there's another rhythm, a deeper pulse that seems to echo from the earth itself. The indigenous peoples of this region have always known this truth. The forest remembers. Every root system, every layered soil horizon, every meandering oxbow lake holds the memory of those who walked here before. Modern instruments can measure the Amazon's vital signs, the oxygen it produces, the carbon it stores, the rainfall it generates. But no instrument yet invented can quantify the weight of memory that hangs in its humid air, or decode the stories written in the rings of trees that have grown over the foundations of civilizations that mainstream archaeology insists never existed. As morning mist dissipates and the forest settles into its daily rhythm of growth and decay, one cannot escape the feeling that this wilderness is not wild at all, but rather the overgrown remnant of humanity's greatest. Garden City, a living monument to builders whose names have been forgotten, but whose breath still moves through the leaves. From the air, the Amazon appears as an endless emerald ocean, its surface broken only by the serpentine gleam of rivers, and the occasional clearing where human presence still dares to assert itself. But this green monotony is an illusion, one that has concealed one of archaeology's greatest oversights for over 5 centuries. Beneath this verdant canopy lies not one forest, but dozens of forest layers, each representing a different epoch of growth, death, and renewal. The soil tells its own story in horizontal chapters, arc organic matter accumulated over centuries, punctuated by layers of charcoal that speak of ancient fires, both natural and human-made. These stratified earth pages preserve a chronicle that challenges every assumption about the Amazon's past. Recent aerial surveys have begun to reveal what ground-based exploration could never detect: geometric patterns etched into the earth itself, visible only when the forest briefly recedes during the dry season, or when modern deforestation accidentally exposes what lies beneath. From 300 feet above the canopy, these formations appear as perfect circles, precise squares, and straight lines that extend for kilometers, geometries far too regular to be natural, far too vast to be accidental. The Amazon, it seems, is not a pristine wilderness untouched by human hands, but rather an archaeological site of unprecedented scale, one where the evidence lies not in fallen stones or buried pottery, but in the very architecture of the landscape itself. Every hill might be a pyramid softened by centuries of root growth. Every circular clearing might mark the center of a plaza where thousands once gathered. Every straight stretch of higher ground might follow the path of an ancient causeway. The forest has become nature's most effective archaeological preservation system, creating a perfect paradox. The very ecosystem that conceals these ancient civilizations may also be their living monument. Root systems follow the foundations of buildings that vanished 1,000 years ago. Groves of useful plants, cacao, Brazil nuts, acai palms cluster in patterns that suggest not wild distribution, but careful cultivation by peoples who understood forest management in ways that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. As we peer deeper into this green mystery, one truth becomes undeniable. The Amazon is not merely a forest that happens to contain archaeological sites. It is itself an archaeological site that happens to be forested. And that changes everything we thought we knew about both the capabilities of ancient civilizations and the very nature of wilderness itself. For over a century, the academic establishment maintained a comfortable certainty about the Amazon basin. It was and had always been a counterfeit paradise. Too poor in soil, too harsh in climate too, isolated by geography to support anything more complex than small wandering tribes of hunter-gatherers. This narrative became so entrenched that it achieved the status of scientific dogma, repeated in textbooks and university lectures as unassailable fact. The logic seemed sound enough. Unlike the river valleys of Mesopotamia or the highlands of Peru, the Amazon appeared to lack the fundamental requirements for civilization. Rich agricultural land, defensible positions, navigable trade routes, and natural resources suitable for monumental architecture. The acidic soils couldn't sustain intensive farming. The humid climate would rot any wooden structures within decades. The maze of rivers and forests would prevent the formation of the trade networks essential to urban development. This scholarly consensus created a powerful feedback loop. If complex Amazonian civilizations were impossible, then any evidence suggesting otherwise must be misinterpreted, exaggerated, or simply ignored. Spanish chronicles describing vast cities became colonial propaganda. Indigenous, oral histories became mythological fabrications. Even physical evidence, earthworks, pottery fragments, areas of unusually fertile soil, was dismissed as either natural phenomena or the insignificant remnants of small, temporary settlements. The pristine wilderness narrative served multiple purposes beyond academic convenience. It supported colonial and post-colonial exploitation of the region by suggesting that the forest contained no significant human heritage worth preserving. It reinforced European assumptions about the inevitable superiority of Old World civilizations. Most insidiously, it rendered invisible the sophisticated environmental management systems that indigenous peoples had developed over millennia. But silence has a way of accumulating weight over time. Every aerial photograph showing geometric earthworks, every soil sample revealing human-enhanced fertility, every botanical survey documenting the unnatural clustering of useful plant species. The evidence was always there, waiting patiently beneath the green canopy for someone willing to see past the comfortable certainties of official history. The academic silence about Amazonian civilizations wasn't just wrong, it was deafeningly wrong. And as that silence finally begins to break, it reveals not just lost cities, but an entirely lost understanding of what civilization itself might mean when it grows not from stone and metal, but from earth and trees and the patient shaping of life itself. The pilot banking his small aircraft over the deforested pastures of Acre State in western Brazil could not have known he was about to shatter centuries of archaeological orthodoxy. It was the dry season of 1977, and where cattle now grazed, the receding forest had exposed something that should have been impossible: perfect geometric forms carved into the red earth, visible only from the air. Circles within circles, some measuring over 300 meters in diameter. Perfect squares connected by ruler-straight causeways stretching across kilometers of landscape. Hexagonal and octagonal formations that would have required sophisticated planning and coordinated labor to construct. The precision was breathtaking and utterly inexplicable, according to everything archaeology had taught about pre-Columbian Amazonia. As more flights revealed more geoglyphs across an area larger than Great Britain, the questions multiplied faster than answers. These weren't random clearings or natural formations. The earthworks showed clear evidence of human engineering: raised embankments, precisely angled corners, entry and exit points that suggested controlled access. Some sites contained multiple concentric shapes, creating complex mandala-like patterns that implied both aesthetic sophistication and symbolic meaning. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal found within the earthworks pushed their construction back over 2,000 years, meaning they were already ancient when Europe was still emerging from the Roman collapse. Yet they showed no signs of wear or abandonment, as if their builders had simply vanished at the height of their creative powers, leaving behind only these cryptic signatures carved into the earth. The geoglyphs posed fundamental questions that archaeology was unprepared to answer. Who were the engineers capable of such massive, precise construction? How did they coordinate labor across such vast distances without writing systems or metal tools? What purpose did these earthworks serve ceremonial centers, astronomical calculators, territorial markers, or something else entirely? Perhaps most troubling of all, if these monumental works had existed undetected for centuries beneath the forest canopy, what else might be hidden? The geoglyphs of Acre began to feel less like isolated anomalies and more like the visible tip of a civilization that had learned to write its history not in stone that crumbles, but in earth that endures. The geometric forms continue to emerge as deforestation advances, each new discovery adding another piece to a puzzle that seems to grow more complex rather than clearer with every revelation. The forest that once concealed these earthworks may have been preserving not just individual monuments, but the scattered remnants of humanity's most successful experiment in living architecture. Deep in the Amazon basin, in scattered patches hidden beneath centuries of leaf litter and root growth, lies one of archaeology's most perplexing discoveries: Terra Preta, the mysterious black earth that shouldn't exist according to everything science knows about tropical soils. In a region where heavy rains typically wash nutrients from the earth within years, leaving behind only acidic sterile clay, these patches of dark, incredibly fertile soil stand as monuments to human ingenuity that rivals the pyramids in their sophistication. The black's earth contains 3 times the organic matter of surrounding soils, holds nutrients like a sponge, and possesses the almost magical property of self-renewal. The more it's used, the more fertile it becomes. What makes Terra Preta truly extraordinary is not just its fertility, but its distribution. These patches don't occur randomly across the landscape. They cluster along ancient river channels, form networks connecting strategic high ground, and appear in geometric patterns that mirror the geoglyphs discovered from the air. Some patches cover over 100 hectares, suggesting they once supported settlements of remarkable size and permanence. Chemical analysis reveals the black earth's secret. It was manufactured. Generations of indigenous peoples created this supersoil by combining charcoal, fish bones, pottery fragments, human waste, and other organic materials in precise proportions that modern science is still struggling to replicate. The process required not just knowledge of soil chemistry, but social organization capable of maintaining complex waste management systems over centuries. But Terra Preta represents something more profound than agricultural innovation. It embodies a completely different philosophy of civilization, one that builds not by extracting from the earth, but by enriching it. While old world civilizations left behind monuments of stone and metal that gradually decay, Amazonian peoples created monuments of life itself, soils that continued to support flourishing ecosystems long after their makers vanished. The distribution of black earth patches across the Amazon basin suggests something that challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian America, a connected civilization of unprecedented scale, one that spanned thousands of kilometers and sustained itself not through conquest and exploitation, but through the patient construction of fertility itself. These dark soils are maps written in carbon and clay, marking the locations of cities that grew from the earth rather than upon it. They preserve the memory of a civilization that understood something modern agriculture has forgotten, that true wealth lies not in taking from the land, but in giving back to it so abundantly that the gift continues growing for thousands of years. As researchers continue mapping Terra Preta sites, they're reconstructing not just the settlements of ancient Amazonia, but an entirely different model of human development, one where success was measured not by monuments that last, but by life that continues. Picture them in the pre-dawn mist along the flooded forests of the Varzea, these master engineers of earth and water whose names were never carved in stone because they built their legacy into the living landscape itself. They moved through a world that looked nothing like the wilderness that European explorers would encounter. World of managed forests, constructed wetlands, and cities that breathed with the seasons like vast, organized organisms. These were not the noble savages of romantic imagination, nor the primitive wanderers of colonial dismissal. They were something far more remarkable, the world's first masters of ecological architecture, builders who understood that the most enduring structures are not imposed upon nature, but grown in partnership with it. Their cities rose and fell with the annual flood cycles, neighborhoods shifting from riverside plazas during the dry season to raised platforms and connected walkways when the waters came. Buildings were not permanent fixtures fighting against entropy, but living systems designed to decay and renew, their materials returning to the soil to feed the next cycle of growth. Imagine the knowledge required to orchestrate such complexity. They were simultaneously hydraulic engineers, soil chemists, forest managers, and urban planners. They created networks of canals that could manage floods across thousands of square kilometers. They developed waste management systems that transformed human refuse into the most fertile soil on Earth. They cultivated forests that provided everything from food and medicine to construction materials and dyes, all while supporting biodiversity that surpassed any natural ecosystem. Their monuments were groves of Brazil nut trees arranged in perfect geometries, still producing after 1,000 years. Their libraries were the genetic diversity of domesticated plants, over 3,000 species of useful flora, carefully bred and distributed across the basin. Their architecture was the forest itself, shaped and guided, but never dominated, improved but never destroyed. The scale of their achievement becomes clear only when viewed from above. A civilization that encompassed an area larger than the Roman Empire at its height, but one that left almost no trace visible to ground-based observation. They were masters of the invisible, architects whose greatest buildings were made of soil and roots and the patient shaping of living systems. These engineers of the earth created the ultimate sustainable civilization, one so perfectly integrated with its environment that when it finally vanished, it didn't leave ruins. It left gardens that still flourish in the deep forest, tended now only by the trees themselves. As dawn breaks over the chocolate-colored waters of the Amazon's tributaries, researchers in dugout canoes are tracing the arteries of a lost world. These rivers, which modern maps show as natural waterways meandering through virgin forest, tell a different story to those who know how to read the subtle signs of human engineering written in their banks and bends. Beneath the surface of what appears to be pristine wilderness, LiDAR technology is revealing the bones of an infrastructure project that dwarfs anything attempted by modern civilization. Artificial canals connect river systems that nature never joined. Raised causeways follow the high ground between watersheds with the precision of Roman roads. Fish weirs and artificial ponds dot the landscape in numbers that suggest aquaculture on an industrial scale. The people who built this hydraulic civilization understood something that modern engineers are only beginning to appreciate. In the Amazon, water is not obstacle, but opportunity. Instead of fighting the annual floods, they designed their entire society to harness them. Canals channeled floodwaters to agricultural terraces. Artificial ponds concentrated fish protein. Raised fields used the flood cycle to irrigate crops and deposit fertile sediments. Along the major tributaries, the Tapajos, the Xingu, the Tocantins aerial photography reveals the ghostly outlines of harbor facilities. Regularly spaced clearings connected to the rivers by artificial channels, their boundaries still visible as changes in vegetation centuries after abandonment. These weren't random fishing camps, but coordinated ports suggesting trade networks that span the continent. Pottery fragments found at these river sites tell stories of remarkable cultural exchange. Ceramics in styles characteristic of the Andes appear alongside others from the Caribbean coast. Jade from Central America mingles with quartz crystals from the Brazilian highlands. The rivers of Amazonia weren't barriers separating isolated tribes, but highways connecting a hemisphere-spanning network of trade and cultural exchange. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this river civilization was its sustainability. Unlike other hydraulic societies that eventually collapsed due to salinization, siltation, or resource depletion, the Amazonian system seemed designed to improve with use. The fish farms increased river productivity. The managed floods enhanced soil fertility. The forest corridors connecting river systems created genetic highways that maintained biodiversity even as human populations flourished. As modern Brazil struggles with deforestation and climate change, the ghost harbors along these ancient rivers offer a haunting lesson. There was once a way to live with the Amazon that made both human civilization and natural abundance not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing. The rivers remember, even if we have forgotten. Here is a fact that transforms everything we think we know about wilderness. Much of what we call the pristine Amazon rainforest was actually planted by human hands. The discovery emerged gradually as botanists began noticing patterns too regular to be natural, distributions too convenient to be accidental. Walk through any section of virgin Amazon rainforest today, and the trees around you tell a story of human cultivation stretching back millennia. Brazil nut groves cluster in perfect geometric arrangements, their spacing optimized for both nut production and canopy coverage. Cacao trees, the source of chocolate, appear in densities found nowhere else in nature, often arranged in neat rows still visible to aerial photography. The evidence is everywhere once you know what to look for. Acai palms growing in suspiciously straight lines. Peach palms concentrated around the sites of ancient settlements, their fruit still feeding communities 1,000 years after the original planters vanished. Medicinal plants clustering in pharmacy forests, where shamans once cultivated healing compounds with the precision of laboratory chemists. Modern genetic analysis has revealed the scope of this botanical engineering project. Over 11,000 years ago, indigenous peoples began the world's most successful experiment in permaculture, selectively breeding wild plants to increase their yields, extend their ranges, and optimize their usefulness. They created what might be called the first shopping mall, a forest designed to provide everything human communities needed, from food and medicine to construction materials and spiritual guidance. The irony is breathtaking. The pristine wilderness that European colonizers claimed to discover was actually the world's largest and most sophisticated garden, a living monument to humanity's capacity to enhance rather than degrade natural systems. The forest we fight to preserve from human interference was created by human collaboration with natural processes over spans of time that make our own civilization look like a brief experiment. This revelation forces a complete reassessment of what we mean by nature and civilization. The Amazon rainforest isn't nature despite human presence. It's nature because of human presence, shaped by thousands of years of careful collaboration between indigenous peoples and the living, systems they understood as partners rather than resources. The forest that breathes around us is not wild. It's the ultimate expression of human wildness. Our species at its most creative, most sustainable, most successful. It's what civilization looks like when it grows instead of builds, when it enhances instead of extracts, when it thinks in centuries instead of quarters. In the archives of Seville, in documents that gathered dust beneath the weight of colonial bureaucracy, lie first-hand accounts that archaeology dismissed for centuries as fantasy or propaganda. Spanish conquistadors, men whose own cities rarely exceeded a few thousand inhabitants, wrote detailed reports of Amazonian settlements that stretched along riverbanks for days of travel, with populations that seemed to number in the hundreds of thousands. Francisco de Orellana, the first European to navigate the length of the Amazon, described riverside cities with wide plazas, multi-story buildings, and agricultural terraces extending inland beyond the horizon. Gaspar de Carvajal, the chronicler of that expedition, wrote of settlements so densely packed that there was not a crossbow shot of space between them. He described fleets of war canoes that darkened the river like floating forests, coordinated military responses that suggested sophisticated communication networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. But these accounts created an uncomfortable problem for European colonizers and later historians. If the Amazon truly contained urban civilizations rivaling those of Europe, then the conquest was not a triumph of civilization over wilderness, but a catastrophic collision between two sophisticated but utterly different models of human organization. If indigenous Amazonian societies were capable of the urban planning, agricultural management, and social coordination described in these chronicles, then European claims of cultural superiority became much harder to sustain. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Declare the Spanish accounts unreliable. Orellana became a fabricator, seeking to inflate his own reputation. Carvajal became a victim of jungle fever and wishful thinking. The vast cities became mirages, created by European expectations and indigenous deception. By the time the next generation of explorers arrived, finding only forest where the Spaniards had described cities, the dismissal seemed confirmed. But what if the later explorers were the ones who got it wrong? What if they arrived to find not permanent cities of stone, but the abandoned infrastructure of a civilization that had already retreated into the forest's protection? The Spanish arrived at what may have been the absolute peak of Amazonian urban development. Later explorers came after European diseases had decimated populations, and survivors had melted back into the deep forest, leaving their earth and wood cities to be reclaimed by the green tide. The tragedy isn't just that Europe failed to recognize a sophisticated civilization. It is that this failure of recognition became institutional, creating a blind spot in human knowledge that persisted for centuries. The mapmakers looked away at the crucial moment, and in doing so, erased one of humanity's greatest experiments in sustainable urban development from the historical record. Now, as satellites and LiDAR reveal the geometric patterns hidden beneath the forest canopy, those dismissed Spanish accounts are starting to look less like fantasy and more like the last accurate census of a world we lost before we ever understood it existed. On February 12, 1542, Francisco de Orellana made a decision that would either damn him as history's greatest liar or vindicate him as the chronicler of a lost world. Separated from Francisco Pizarro's main expedition, running desperately short of supplies, Orellana chose to follow the current of an unknown river rather than attempt the treacherous return journey over the Andes. He had no idea he was about to become the first European to witness what may have been the largest urban civilization in human history. What Orellana saw along that river, which would eventually bear the name Amazon, defied every European assumption about the New World. The expedition's chronicler, Gaspar de Carvajal, documented settlements that seemed to stretch without interruption for days of travel. He described plazas that could hold thousands of people, raised roads connecting river ports to inland cities, agricultural terraces extending to the horizon like green staircases ascending into the sky. The numbers in Carvajal's account seem almost absurd by the standards of 16th century Europe. He estimated populations of individual settlements at 50,000 to 80,000, people sizes that would have made them among the largest cities in the world at the time. He described military flotillas of over 1,000 war canoes, each carrying 20 to 30 warriors. Most remarkably, he noted that these were not isolated settlements, but parts of a connected civilization that seemed to extend across the entire breadth of the continent. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Orellana's account was his description of the civilization's relationship with its environment. Unlike European cities, which imposed their order upon the landscape, these Amazonian settlements seemed to flow with the natural rhythms of flood and dry season, expansion and contraction, like vast organisms breathing with the pulse of the river itself. When Orellana finally reached the Atlantic after 8 months of river travel, he carried with him what should have been one of history's most important documents, the first and last detailed description of a functioning Amazonian mega-civilization. Instead, his account was dismissed as the delusion of a desperate man seeking to justify his unauthorized expedition. The curse of Francisco de Orellana was not that he lied, but that he told a truth so extraordinary that it could not be believed. For 4 centuries, his name was synonymous with colonial exaggeration and self-serving fantasy. Only now, as aerial archaeology reveals the mathematical precision of earthworks hidden beneath the forest canopy, are we beginning to understand that Orellana may have been the most accurate ethnography of his generation. His curse is becoming our revelation, the realization that we dismissed as impossible what was merely unprecedented, and in doing so, lost the memory of humanity's most successful experiment in living with, rather than against, the natural world. The greatest mystery in human history may not be how ancient Amazonian civilizations built their forest cities, but how they made them disappear so completely that their very existence became myth. By the time systematic European exploration began in earnest during the 18th century, the vast settlements described by earlier conquistadors had vanished as thoroughly as if they had never existed. The most obvious culprit was disease. European pathogens, arriving like invisible armies ahead of the explorers themselves, may have devastated Amazonian populations with a swiftness and completeness that left no time for adaptation. Smallpox, measles, typhus, and influenza diseases that had plagued European populations for millennia, and against which they had developed some resistance, struck virgin populations with apocalyptic force. Recent epidemiological modeling suggests that disease mortality in post-contact Amazonia may have reached 90% or higher within a single generation. Entire linguistic groups vanished. Trade networks that had functioned for millennia collapsed overnight. Urban centers that had taken centuries to develop were abandoned in years, their surviving populations scattering into the deep forest in a desperate search for refuge from the plague winds that seemed to follow European contact. But disease alone cannot explain the completeness of the vanishing. Stone cities leave ruins even when their populations die. The Amazonian settlements, however, seem to have been designed for disappearance. Built from wood, earth, and living plants, they were already more ecosystem than architecture. When human maintenance ceased, the forest reclaimed them with shocking speed. Within a generation, wooden structures rotted into rich soil. Roads became overgrown trails, then disappeared entirely under the advance of secondary forest. Plazas filled with pioneer species fast-growing trees that erased the geometric patterns of human planning beneath blankets of green chaos. The very sustainability that allowed these cities to flourish for millennia became the mechanism of their erasure. Some evidence suggests the disappearance wasn't entirely passive. Oral traditions among surviving indigenous groups speak of deliberate withdrawal, communities choosing to abandon their settlements and return to the forest rather than face the violence and disease that followed European contact. The jungle became not just refuge, but resistance, a place where traditional knowledge could survive, even if traditional settlements could not. Perhaps most remarkably, the forest itself may have conspired in the concealment. Trees grew along the foundations of ancient buildings, their root systems following the geometric patterns of vanished architecture. Useful plants continued to flourish in the locations of former gardens, creating botanical monuments that only indigenous eyes could read. The vanishing of Amazonian civilizations was not just demographic collapse, it was the greatest magic trick in human history. The transformation of cities into wilderness, so complete that even the memory of their existence became folklore. In the Amazon, entropy is not just a physical law, it's an active force with teeth, claws, and an appetite for anything that dares to impose permanent order upon the landscape. The forest doesn't simply reclaim human constructions. It devours them with a voracious creativity that seems almost conscious in its thoroughness. Watch what happens to a clearing in the Amazon when human maintenance ceases. Within months, pioneer species begin their assault. Fast-growing cecropier trees, aggressive vines, opportunistic shrubs that can add meters to their height in a single growing season. These biological colonizers don't simply fill empty space, they actively reshape it, creating new soil chemistry, new microclimates, new ecological relationships that make the return of human organization increasingly difficult. The forest's weapons against permanence are diverse and sophisticated. Termites consume any wooden structure within years, their digestive enzymes breaking down complex cellulose into nutrients that feed the very trees that will replace human settlements. Army ants redirect their columns along human pathways, gradually widening them until they become natural corridors that serve forest needs rather than human ones. Roots are perhaps the forest's most effective agents of transformation. They don't simply grow around human constructions. They actively penetrate, lift, and fragment any artificial structure. The rubber tree roots that snake through the stones of Angkor Wat in Cambodia pale comparison to the systematic dismantling capabilities of Amazon forest giants. Ceiba and Brazil nut trees can split stone foundations with the slow, inexorable pressure of their expanding root systems. But the forest's most impressive skill is its ability to erase the very memory of human presence. Rain washes away footpaths within seasons. The complex chemistry of tropical decomposition breaks down organic materials so completely that archaeologists struggle to find traces of organic artifacts that would survive for millennia in drier climates. Even pottery sherds, among the most durable human artifacts, can be dissolved by the aggressive soil chemistry of the rainforest floor. The Amazon has elevated decomposition to an art form. What takes centuries to decay in temperate climates disappears in decades here. Wood becomes soil, thatch becomes humus. Stone foundations become substrate for orchid gardens. The forest doesn't just reclaim its territory, it digests it, incorporating the very atoms of human construction into the web of life. This remorseless appetite for dissolution may explain why Amazonian civilizations built in such harmony with natural cycles. Any society that tried to impose permanent structures on this landscape would face not just practical difficulties, but active resistance from an ecosystem that has been perfecting the art of making human constructions disappear for millions of years. The forest that fights back is also the forest that forgives, transforming the errors of permanence into the wisdom of cycles, teaching the ultimate lesson that in the Amazon, victory belongs not to those who build to last, but to those who build to grow. Deep in the Mato Grosso, where the Amazon transitions into Cerrado savanna, anthropologist Dr. Marina Santos follows her Kayapo guide along what appears to be a barely visible animal trail. But Roberto, whose grandfather was a powerful shaman, insists they are walking on a road that has been traveled for over 1,000 years, though no map has ever marked its existence. My grandfather could see it clearly, Roberto explains, pausing at what looks like a natural rise in the forest floor. He said the old ones built their paths not with stones, but with purpose. The forest remembers purpose. The rise is perhaps 2 meters higher than the surrounding terrain, barely perceptible to untrained eyes. But as they walk, Marina begins to notice the pattern. Subtle elevations that continue in an almost perfectly straight line through dense forest, crossing streams at their narrowest points, avoiding wetlands with the precision of modern engineering. Roberto stops at a massive Brazil nut tree whose trunk bears the scars of centuries. This is a marker tree, he says. The shamans planted these to guide travelers. If you know how to look, you can see the network tree to tree, connecting all the sacred places. As if to demonstrate, he points to another ancient Brazil nut, perhaps 500 meters away, then another beyond that, each positioned with a clarity that becomes obvious once pointed out. The animal trail they've been following suddenly reveals itself as part of a transportation system, subtle, sustainable, but undeniably human in its design. 3 hours later, the path crests a barely noticeable hill, and Roberto gestures toward a circular clearing perhaps 50 meters in diameter. "The old ones called this place of the ancestors," he says. "My grandfather brought me here when I was 12. He said it was once a great gathering place, where people came from many days' walk to trade and celebrate." To Marina's archaeologically trained eye, the clearing shows clear signs of human modification. The perfect circularity, the raised earthen rim, the central depression that might once have been a plaza. But it's Roberto's next words that make her skin prickle with recognition. He said the ancestors didn't abandon this place, they became it. The trees, the soil, the paths between, all of it remembers them. As late afternoon light filters through the canopy, Marina realizes she is standing in the heart of what Western archaeology insists never existed. A sacred landscape where human purpose and natural process had merged so completely that the civilization itself had become ecosystem. The shaman's road had led not to ruins, but to a living monument that only indigenous eyes could properly perceive. "The forest remembers," Roberto had said, and in that moment, surrounded by the whisper of leaves that might themselves be the voices of ancestors, Marina finally understands what memory means in a place where history is written in roots and rings and the patient growth of trees. In the gentlemen's clubs of London, where empire's twilight still cast long shadows across maps of the world, Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett studied the ancient Portuguese documents with the intensity of a man possessed. The year was 1925, and Fawcett's surveyor, explorer, veteran of the Royal Artillery, was preparing for what he believed would be the most important expedition in archaeological history. The documents spoke of a great stone city hidden in the Brazilian interior, a place the Portuguese called simply Z, but Fawcett had begun to suspect that Z represented something far more significant than a single lost settlement. His decades of exploration in South America had revealed tantalizing hints of a vast, sophisticated civilization that predated European contact by millennia, a civilization that might hold the key to understanding humanity's as forgotten past. Fawcett's obsession with Z grew from more than academic curiosity. His surveys of the Amazon basin had revealed geographical anomalies that conventional wisdom could not explain. Perfectly straight clearings that extended for kilometers through dense forest. Circular formations visible only from high-ground networks of raised paths that connected strategic points across vast distances. These weren't natural features, but they didn't match any known indigenous construction techniques either. The colonel's theories became increasingly elaborate and mystical as evidence accumulated. He began to believe that Z was not just a city, but the center of an advanced civilization that had achieved a level of technological and spiritual development that surpassed modern societies. His letters home spoke of ancient knowledge preserved in crystal chambers of architectural techniques that worked with natural forces rather than against them, of a people who had solved the fundamental problems of sustainable civilization thousands of years before Europe even attempted them. On May 29, 1925, Fawcett disappeared into the green heart of the Mato Grosso with his son Jack and Jack as friend Raleigh Rimmel. They were carrying supplies for several months of exploration, advanced surveying equipment, and detailed maps based on Portuguese colonial records and indigenous oral traditions. None of them was ever seen alive again. The disappearance of Fawcett and his companions became one of the 20th century's most enduring mysteries, inspiring over 100 rescue expeditions and countless theories about their fate. Some claimed they were killed by hostile tribes. Others suggested they had discovered Z and chosen to remain there, abandoning civilization for a more perfect society hidden in the forest depths. But perhaps the most haunting possibility is that Fawcett was both right and wrong about Z. Right that the Amazon concealed evidence of an advanced lost civilization. Wrong that this civilization was centered on a single stone city waiting to be discovered. The city of Z may never have existed as Fawcett imagined it, not because there was no advanced Amazonian civilization, but because that civilization was so radically different from European models that it remained invisible to even the most dedicated explorers. Fawcett's final quest may have failed not because Z was a myth, but because he was looking for the wrong kind of monument in the wrong kind of place. The civilization he sought had built its greatest works not in stone that would endure, but in soil that would grow, creating a city so vast it encompassed the forest itself. In the cartographer's dilemma between the map and the territory, the Amazon basin became a space where European myth-making and indigenous memory intersected in ways that distorted both historical fact and geographical understanding. The legendary cities that obsessed conquistadors, El Dorado, Petiti, Acacur, the kingdom of the Amazons, were neither pure fantasy nor accurate description, but something more complex, the collision between two radically different ways of understanding space, time, and civilization itself. European explorers arrived in the Amazon carrying conceptual maps drawn from their own urban experience. They expected to find cities that looked like cities' concentrated populations, defensive walls, monumental architecture, clear boundaries between urban and rural space. When they encountered Amazonian settlements that sprawled along riverbanks for dozens of kilometers, that shifted location with seasonal floods, that blended seamlessly into managed forests and agricultural parklands, they struggled to categorize what they were seeing. The result was a systematic mistranslation of indigenous spatial concepts into European mythological frameworks. Native accounts of vast settled territories became golden cities. Descriptions of seasonal ceremonial centers became hidden kingdoms. References to networks of connected communities became single magnificent capitals waiting to be discovered and conquered. But the indigenous peoples, who served as guides and informants for these expeditions, were engaged in their own complex negotiations with truth. Some deliberately misdirected Europeans away from sacred sites. Others inflated accounts of distant wealth to encourage explorers to continue their journeys beyond indigenous territory. Still others tried to communicate the genuine sophistication of Amazonian civilization using terms that Europeans might understand, not realizing how profoundly their words would be misinterpreted. The myth of El Dorado illustrates this cultural translation problem perfectly. The historical El Dorado was not a place but a person, the Golden Man, a ruler who covered himself in gold dust for ritual lake ceremonies. But European ears heard Golden City and transformed a religious practice into a geographical destination. Generations of explorers died searching for a city that had never existed, while missing the actual achievements of the societies they encountered. Perhaps most tragically, the mythologization of Amazonian civilization served to obscure its real accomplishments. By transforming sophisticated but unfamiliar forms of human organization into familiar but imaginary golden cities, European accounts made it impossible for later scholars to reconstruct what these societies had actually achieved. The myths became more real than the history they replaced. Modern archaeology is slowly untangling this centuries-old confusion, revealing that the truth behind the myths was more remarkable than the myths themselves. There were no golden cities in the Amazon, but there was something far more precious. Proof that human beings had once achieved a form of civilization so perfectly adapted to its environment that it enhanced, rather than degraded, the natural systems that supported it. The maps drawn by conquistadors and treasure hunters were wrong about geography, but right about one fundamental fact. The Amazon did contain something extraordinary, something worth crossing oceans and risking lives to find. They just didn't understand that what they sought was not a place to conquer, but a way of living that their own civilization had forgotten how to achieve. On a clear morning in 2009, high above the canopy of the Bolivian Amazon, an aircraft carrying LiDAR scanning equipment began to perform what might be considered a form of archaeological magic, seeing through solid forest to reveal the human history written on the landscape beneath. What the light detection and ranging technology discovered in just a few hours of scanning fundamentally challenged 5 centuries of assumptions about pre-Columbian America. The LiDAR system works by firing hundreds of thousands of laser pulses per second toward the ground, measuring with millimeter precision how long each pulse takes to bounce back from whatever it strikes. Most pulses reflect from leaves and branches, but a significant percentage penetrate through gaps in the canopy to map the actual ground surface beneath. Computer processing can then digitally remove the forest, revealing the naked topography that lies hidden below the green shroud. What emerged from this digital deforestation was breathtaking. Geometric earthworks covering over 8,000 square kilometers, an area larger than the state of Connecticut. Perfect circles, precise squares, and connecting causeways revealed themselves in patterns that could only have been created by sophisticated urban planning. The scale dwarfed anything previously known from pre-Columbian Amazonia. But the LiDAR revelations were just beginning. Follow-up surveys across Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador revealed similar patterns. Vast networks of raised fields, artificial water management systems, and settlement complexes that suggested population densities comparable to contemporary European cities. In some areas, the human modification of the landscape was so extensive that almost no natural terrain remained. The entire visible topography had been consciously designed and constructed. The geometric precision of these earthworks was particularly stunning. Circles with diameters of over 300 meters maintained perfectly round shapes despite being constructed with wooden tools and human labor. Square formations had corners accurate to within degrees. Connecting causeways ran straight as arrows across kilometers of varied terrain, maintaining constant grades that would challenge modern engineering capabilities. Perhaps most remarkably, the LiDAR data revealed that these earthworks were not isolated monuments, but components of integrated landscape-scale systems. Water management channels connected earthworks across watersheds. Raised fields created agricultural networks that spanned entire river basins. Settlement areas were positioned with mathematical precision to optimize trade routes, flood management, and defensive positioning. The technology that allowed satellites to peer through forest canopy also revealed something else. The earthworks showed clear evidence of astronomical alignment. Many circular formations were oriented to track solstices, equinoxes, and complex planetary cycles. The builders of these monuments were not just engineers and agriculturalists, but sophisticated astronomers whose understanding of celestial mechanics rivaled that of their contemporaries in Europe and Asia. As LiDAR surveys continue to expand across the Amazon basin, each new revelation adds weight to a revolutionary conclusion. Pre-Columbian Amazonia may have supported urban civilizations more extensive and sophisticated than anything that existed in Europe at the time of contact. The sky has finally revealed what the forest floor had hidden for 5 centuries. Evidence that the Amazon was not wilderness punctuated by small human settlements, but a vast garden city that represented one of humanity's greatest achievements in sustainable urban development. From 3,000 feet above the Amazon basin, what looks like chaotic wilderness suddenly reveals its secret mathematical nature. LiDAR technology has exposed one of the most extraordinary facts in archaeological history. Vast sections of the Amazon rainforest are laid out according to precise geometric principles that would make ancient Greek mathematicians weep with envy. The numbers are staggering in their precision. Circular earthworks maintain perfect radii despite encompassing areas larger than modern city blocks. Square formations have sides that vary by less than a meter across distances of hundreds of meters. Most remarkably, the angles and proportions used in these earthworks demonstrate sophisticated understanding of mathematical relationships that weren't formally codified in European mathematics until the Renaissance. Take the earthworks of Acre State in western Brazil. Over 450 geometric figures scattered across 13,000 square kilometers, each positioned with surveyor-level accuracy despite being constructed with wooden tools and human labor over 2,000 years ago. The circular formations average 300 meters in diameter, a measurement that appears again and again across different sites, suggesting standardized units of measurement that were maintained across vast distances and long periods of time. But the geometry goes deeper than individual monuments. The earthworks are positioned relative to each other according to complex mathematical relationships. Sites separated by dozens of kilometers align with astronomical phenomena, solstices, equinoxes, the rising points of specific stars. The angles between connecting causeways often correspond to sacred mathematical ratios found in ancient architecture around the world. Perhaps most mysteriously, many earthwork complexes incorporate the golden ratio, that magical proportion, approximately 1.618, that appears throughout nature and classical architecture. Rectangular earthworks often have sides that relate to each other according to this ratio. Circular formations are frequently positioned at golden ratio distances from associated square formations. The mathematical sophistication suggests a level of abstract thinking that contradicts every stereotype about primitive Amazonian societies. The geometric precision extends beyond ceremonial earthworks to practical infrastructure. Raised agricultural fields follow mathematical patterns that optimize drainage, sun exposure, and planting density. Canal networks branch according to fractal principles that maximize water distribution efficiency. Even the positioning of useful trees in managed forests shows evidence of geometric planning. What makes these discoveries even more remarkable is their age. Carbon dating places many of these geometric earthworks at over 2,000 years old contemporary with the height of Roman engineering, but using completely different principles and achieving arguably superior results in terms of environmental integration. The Amazon's hidden geometry forces a fundamental reassessment of indigenous mathematical knowledge. These weren't primitive peoples stumbling toward civilization, but sophisticated geometers whose understanding of spatial relationships may have exceeded that of their old-world contemporaries. They were, quite literally, landscape mathematicians who wrote their equations in earth and trees, creating theorems that are still visible from space 2 millennia after their authors disappeared into history. In the pre-dawn darkness of the upper Amazon, where mist rises from waters that have flowed unchanged for millions of years, lies evidence of perhaps the most audacious engineering project in human history: the deliberate modification of an entire continent as weather patterns. The ancient peoples of Amazonia may not have built monuments of stone, but they built something far more ambitious. They engineered the sky itself. The clues are scattered across the basin like pieces of a climatological puzzle. Artificial lakes positioned with mathematical precision to maximize evaporation during dry seasons. Canal networks that seem designed not just for transportation, but for moving water from flood zones to areas that needed increased humidity. Forest compositions that appear to have been optimized for rainfall generation rather than simple agricultural production. Modern climate science has revealed that the Amazon rainforest doesn't just depend on rainfall, it creates it. Trees pump moisture into the atmosphere through transpiration, creating rivers of vapor that carry water inland from the Atlantic Ocean. This biological pump system generates roughly half of the Amazon's own rainfall and significantly influences weather patterns across South America and beyond. But what if this system wasn't entirely natural? What if indigenous engineers, working over centuries with a patience that makes modern project timelines look rushed, had consciously modified the forest's hydrological cycle to optimize rainfall distribution? The evidence suggests they had both the knowledge and the motivation to attempt such landscape-scale climate engineering. The distribution of useful plant species across the Amazon shows patterns that make sense only if viewed as a coordinated reforestation project. Fast-growing trees that maximize transpiration are clustered in areas where increased rainfall would benefit agricultural terraces. Slow-growing hardwoods that store water during dry seasons are positioned along watersheds where they can sustain river flow during droughts. Perhaps most remarkably, the geometric earthworks revealed by LIDAR technology show clear relationships to seasonal weather patterns. Many circular formations are positioned to capture and channel rainwater during the wet season, then release it slowly during dry periods. The raised causeways connecting these formations often follow ridgelines that would maximize their effectiveness as water distribution systems. The scale of this hypothetical climate engineering project would dwarf any modern terraforming proposal. We're talking about the conscious modification of an ecosystem larger than the continental United States, orchestrated by societies that left no written records and used no metal tools. Yet the mathematical precision of the remaining earthworks suggests exactly this kind of landscape-scale planning and execution. If these ancient Amazonians were indeed climate engineers, they achieved something that modern civilization can barely imagine. They improved upon natural weather patterns without disrupting the underlying ecological systems that generated them. They may have been the only human society in history to successfully terraform a continent while enhancing rather than degrading its biodiversity. The lost engineers of the rain left behind no blueprints, no instruction manuals, no theoretical treatises on climate modification. But they may have left something more valuable, a functioning example of how human intelligence can work with natural systems to improve the habitability of an entire region. In an age of climate crisis, their achievement may be the most important archaeological discovery of all. In the depths of the Amazon night, where the canopy blocks all but the brightest stars and the forest whispers with voices that seem older than human, the geometric earthworks scattered across the basin reveal another layer of their mystery. These monuments weren't just engineering marvels or ceremonial centers. They were books written in earth and sky, encoding astronomical knowledge in a language that modern science is only beginning to decode. The circular earthworks of Acre align with remarkable precision to the winter solstice sunset, their entrances positioned to frame the dying light at the year's turning point. But this is just the beginning of their celestial connections. Complex multi-circle sites track the 18.6-year lunar cycle, predicting eclipses with accuracy that rivals modern calculations. Square formations orient to the cardinal directions with precision that would challenge contemporary surveyors working with GPS technology. But the astronomical alignments go deeper than simple calendar keeping. Many earthwork complexes encode sophisticated understanding of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's S-axis that causes the positions of stars to shift over millennia. Some sites appear to be aligned not to current star positions, but to where specific constellations appeared thousands of years ago, suggesting that these astronomical monuments were designed with deep time in mind. The indigenous cosmologies recorded by anthropologists provide context for this astronomical sophistication. Amazonian creation myths consistently describe the world as emerging from the interaction between terrestrial and celestial forces. The Earth is seen as a living entity whose seasonal cycles mirror the movements of heavenly bodies. Human settlements are understood as nodes in a cosmic web that connects the underworld of roots, the middle world of human experience, and the upper world of stars. This cosmological framework helps explain the seemingly obsessive precision with which earthworks were aligned to astronomical phenomena. For their builders, these monuments weren't just human constructions, but participation in cosmic processes, physical prayers that connected earthbound communities to the vast rhythms of space and time. Recent analysis of the geometric patterns encoded in earthwork designs reveals even more sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The proportions used in many circular formations correspond to mathematical relationships between planetary orbits. The spacing between connected monuments often matches the angular distances between specific stars as viewed from Amazonian latitudes. Perhaps most remarkably, some earthwork complexes appear to function as three-dimensional star maps, with individual monuments representing specific constellations and their relative positions matching celestial geography. These earthwork observatories would have allowed their users to track complex astronomical cycles while remaining grounded in terrestrial ceremonial space. The language of roots and stars speaks to a worldview that saw no fundamental separation between human culture and cosmic process. The earthwork builders understood themselves as participants in universal patterns that connected the smallest details of forest ecology to the largest cycles of galactic motion. Their monuments were not attempts to dominate nature, but to harmonize human activity with the fundamental rhythms that govern all existence. In an age when light pollution has disconnected most humans from direct experience of the night sky, these ancient astronomical monuments offer a humbling reminder of what we have lost. The builders of the earthworks lived in intimate relationship with cosmic rhythms that regulated everything from agricultural planning to spiritual practice. They built their civilization around the recognition that human prosperity depends ultimately on understanding and aligning with forces far greater than themselves. As the mists of morning rise from the Amazon's countless tributaries, carrying with them the breath of ancient trees and the memory of civilizations lost to time, a remarkable possibility emerges from the convergence of myth and archaeology. Could the sophisticated societies revealed by modern technology in the Amazon basin represent one piece of a global pattern evidence that advanced civilizations rose and fell across the earth long before the historical records begin? The parallels are striking. Plato's Atlantis was described as a naval power with sophisticated agriculture, complex social organization, and eventual disappearance beneath rising waters. The Amazon civilizations revealed by LiDAR show evidence of advanced hydraulic engineering, coordinated urban planning across vast distances, and ultimate submersion beneath a green sea of returning forest. Both represent civilizations that achieved remarkable sophistication before vanishing so completely that their very existence became myth. But the Amazon evidence suggests something more intriguing than simple parallel development. The geometric precision of Amazonian earthworks, the astronomical alignments of ceremonial centers, and the landscape-scale engineering projects all point to levels of mathematical and scientific knowledge that seem impossible to develop in isolation. Could these achievements represent fragments of a more connected ancient world, global civilization that linked the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia through trade networks and knowledge exchange systems that history has forgotten? Consider the mathematical constants embedded in Amazonian earthworks: the golden ratio, precise astronomical alignments, geometric relationships that appear in ancient monuments around the world. The builders of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the designers of the Giza pyramids in Egypt, and the earthwork engineers of Amazonia all seem to understand mathematical principles that weren't formally codified until millennia later. Were these independent discoveries, or evidence of shared knowledge systems that connected ancient civilizations across oceans? The legend of Mu, the lost Pacific civilization described by various indigenous traditions, spoke of master navigators who could cross vast oceans using astronomical knowledge and sophisticated understanding of wind and current patterns. Could such navigators have connected Amazonian river civilizations with advanced societies in other parts of the world, sharing technological and spiritual knowledge that enabled the development of sophisticated civilizations in seemingly impossible locations? Recent genetic and linguistic evidence adds weight to these speculations. DNA studies of indigenous Amazonian populations reveal ancient connections to Asian, Polynesian, and even European genetic lineages. Linguistic analysis shows structural similarities between Amazonian languages and tongues spoken in regions as distant as Australia and the Mediterranean. These connections suggest ancient migration and contact patterns that mainstream archaeology has yet to fully acknowledge. Perhaps most intriguingly, similar stories of great floods and civilizational collapse appear in indigenous traditions around the world. The Amazonian myth of a great deluge that forced advanced peoples to retreat into the forest depths echoes flood narratives from Mesopotamia, India, Australia, and North America. Were these independent responses to local environmental changes, or cultural memories of a global catastrophe that ended a worldwide prehistoric civilization? The Amazon may be more than just another example of lost civilization. It may be a key piece in the puzzle of humanity as forgotten global heritage. As technology reveals the true scope of Amazonian achievements, we may be recovering not just the history of South American peoples, but evidence of humanity's first attempt at planetary civilization. The echoes of Atlantis in the green world may be calling us to remember not just what we lost in the Amazon, but what we lost everywhere, and what we might yet recover. Hidden in the microscopic structure of charcoal fragments scattered across the Amazon basin lies one of archaeology's most startling revelations: a carbon calendar that rewrites the entire timeline of human presence in South America. What began as routine soil sampling for environmental studies has uncovered evidence that indigenous peoples had been continuously modifying Amazonian landscapes for over 11,000 years, making their civilization not just ancient, but among the oldest continuous human settlements on Earth. The carbon doesn't lie. Radiocarbon dating of fire-modified soil horizons reveals a pattern of human activity that stretches back to the end of the last ice age. But these aren't random campfire traces. They show evidence of systematic landscape management that began almost immediately after the first humans arrived in South America and continued uninterrupted until European contact disrupted the cycle. Layer upon layer of precisely dated charcoal tells a story of sophisticated fire management that controlled forest composition across millennia. Indigenous peoples weren't just adapting to existing ecosystems, they were actively designing them, using controlled burns to create the exact mixture of forest types, grasslands, and water features that would optimize both human prosperity and ecological diversity. The numbers are staggering. Across the Amazon basin, carbon dating has identified over 3,000 distinct fire management sites, some showing continuous use for over 8,000 years. The temporal resolution is so precise that archaeologists can identify individual burning seasons, track the gradual expansion and contraction of managed areas, and even detect the responses of specific tree species to different fire management strategies. But perhaps most remarkably, the carbon record shows that this landscape-scale fire management was coordinated across vast distances. Sites separated by hundreds of kilometers show synchronized burning patterns that suggest communication networks and shared management protocols. The Amazon wasn't being modified by scattered, independent groups, but by a coordinated civilization that managed the entire basin as a single integrated system. The carbon calendar also reveals something that challenges fundamental assumptions about indigenous population levels. The scale and continuity of landscape modification indicated by the charcoal record would require population densities far higher than previously estimated. Some regions show evidence of fire management intensity that would only be possible with urban-level populations sustained over centuries. Most intriguingly, the carbon record shows that landscape modification actually accelerated during periods when climate conditions became more challenging. During drought cycles that stressed natural ecosystems, human fire management became more intensive and sophisticated, suggesting that indigenous peoples are actively buffering their environment against climate instability rather than simply adapting to it. The Earth's carbon memory also preserves evidence of the collapse that followed European contact. Around 1600 CE, the precisely managed fire patterns that had continued for millennia suddenly became chaotic, then ceased entirely across vast areas. The forest that Europeans found was not pristine wilderness, but an ecosystem in the early stages of returning to wildness after the collapse of the management systems that had shaped it for over 10,000 years. Hidden in microscopic particles of ancient charcoal, the Earth has preserved the most complete record we possess of humanity's longest-running experiment in sustainable landscape management. The carbon remembers what history books forgot, that the Amazon was not wilderness invaded by civilization, but civilization so perfectly adapted to its environment that it became indistinguishable from nature itself. In the humid darkness before dawn, when the Amazon lies wrapped in mist and mystery, a radical possibility whispers through the leaves. What if the forest itself has become the consciousness of the vanished civilization, a living memory system that preserves not just the physical structures of ancient settlements, but their knowledge, their wisdom, their way of seeing the world? Modern ecology has revealed that forests are not collections of individual trees competing for resources, but integrated networks sharing information through underground fungal connections, aerial chemical signals, and root-to-root electrical communications. The wood wide web of forest intelligence can warn of pest attacks, coordinate responses to drought, and even redistribute nutrients from healthy trees to struggling neighbors. But in the Amazon, where human modification of forest ecosystems spans millennia, this natural intelligence may have been enhanced by generations of indigenous peoples who understood trees not as resources to be harvested, but as partners in a collaborative civilization building project. The useful species that cluster around ancient settlement sites don't just mark where people once lived. They may be the forest's attempt to maintain the relationships that sustained both human and natural communities for thousands of years. Consider the Brazil nut groves that still mark ancient trade routes, their geometric arrangements too perfect to be natural, too persistent to be accidental. These trees live for over 500 years, meaning that existing groves were planted by peoples whose civilization was already ancient when Europeans arrived. But the trees continue producing according to patterns that seem designed to support human communities that no longer exist, as if the forest is maintaining infrastructure for inhabitants who might someday return. The same pattern appears throughout Amazonian ecosystems. Fruit trees cluster around ancient earthworks in densities that would support significant populations. Medicinal plants grow along pathways that connect former settlement sites, as if the forest is maintaining ancient pharmacy networks. Palm groves that once provided building materials continue to regenerate in perfect geometric patterns centuries after the builders disappeared. Perhaps most remarkably, indigenous peoples who still live in the deep forest describe the trees as active participants in human culture, not just sources of materials, but teachers, healers, and keepers of ancestral knowledge. Shamanic traditions speak of plant teachers who preserve the memories of ancient peoples, passing down through root and sap the accumulated wisdom of millennia. Recent research into plant intelligence has revealed capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction just decades ago. Plants can process information, make decisions, communicate with other species, and even demonstrate forms of learning and memory. In an ecosystem where human and natural selection have intertwined for thousands of years, the boundary between plant intelligence and human consciousness may have become meaningfully blurred. The forest that thinks is not a mystical fantasy, but a logical outcome of humanity's most successful experiment in collaborative intelligence. By working with natural systems rather than against them, indigenous Amazonians may have created something unprecedented in human history. A civilization that literally grew itself, encoding its values and knowledge into the living landscape that sustained it. If this is true, then the Amazon's trees are not just ecological resources, but libraries, living repositories of human wisdom, written in genetic code and preserved in wood. The forest's whispers may be the echo of ancient voices, still teaching lessons about sustainability, cooperation, and the patient work of building civilizations that enhance rather than diminish the natural world. In an age when artificial intelligence promises to reshape human society, the Amazon offers a humbling reminder that the most sophisticated intelligence systems may not be made of silicon and code, but of roots and leaves and the slow, patient accumulation of evolutionary wisdom. The forest thinks, and in thinking, it remembers what we have forgotten about living in partnership with the living world. High above the Amazon canopy, where satellites drift in silent orbits and aircraft trace methodical patterns across the sky, a revolution in archaeological discovery is rewriting the human story one laser pulse at a time. The new archaeologists work not with trowels and brushes, but with LiDAR arrays and machine learning algorithms, quantum computing and artificial intelligence systems that can see patterns invisible to human eyes. These aerial archaeologists have advantages that their ground-based predecessors could never have imagined. LiDAR technology can penetrate forest canopy to map terrain with centimeter-level precision. Satellite imagery can track changes in vegetation that reveal buried structures. Hyperspectral analysis can identify the chemical signatures of human-modified soils from space. Most remarkably, artificial intelligence systems can process these massive datasets to identify archaeological sites faster than human researchers could visit them. The marriage of indigenous knowledge and high technology has proven particularly powerful. GPS-enabled smartphones allow indigenous guides to mark the precise locations of sites known to oral tradition but unmapped by Western science. Digital cameras and portable 3D scanners can document petroglyphs, earthworks, and artifact scatters with museum-quality precision. Drone-mounted sensors can map entire archaeological complexes in hours, rather than the months that traditional surveys required. But perhaps the most transformative tool in the new archaeological toolkit is the AI pattern recognition system. Machine learning algorithms trained on known archaeological sites can scan satellite imagery of the entire Amazon basin, identifying potential earthworks, settlement patterns, and landscape modifications with success rates that exceed 90%. These systems can detect geometric regularity, analyze vegetation anomalies, and identify the subtle signatures of human landscape modification that would take human researchers years to catalog. The results have been extraordinary. In just the past decade, aerial archaeology has identified more pre-Columbian sites in Amazonia than ground-based research discovered in the previous century. The pace of discovery is accelerating as AI systems become more sophisticated and aerial imagery becomes more readily available. Researchers are now discovering new archaeological sites faster than they can visit them, a pleasant problem that represents the complete inversion of traditional archaeological limitations. Indigenous communities have emerged as essential partners in this technological revolution. Their oral histories provide crucial context for interpreting aerial discoveries. Their traditional ecological knowledge helps researchers understand how ancient landscape modifications functioned as integrated systems. Most importantly, their contemporary presence ensures that archaeological discoveries serve the interests of living communities rather than abstract academic research. The new archaeology is also revealing the inadequacy of traditional disciplinary boundaries. Understanding Amazonian civilizations requires expertise in botany, soil science, climatology, and computer modeling as much as conventional archaeological training. The earthworks revealed by LiDAR are simultaneously archaeological sites, ecological systems, and engineering marvels that challenge researchers to think across multiple scales of space and time. As the digital mapping of Amazonia accelerates, researchers are beginning to glimpse the true scope of pre-Columbian achievement. What seemed like scattered anomalies are revealing themselves as components of integrated systems spanning the continent. The new archaeologists of air and code are not just discovering individual sites, but reconstructing the most extensive and sophisticated landscape management system in human history. Their work is also urgent. Every year, deforestation destroys archaeological sites that have survived for millennia. Climate change is altering vegetation patterns that helped preserve ancient earthworks. The window for documenting Amazonian archaeological heritage may be measured in decades rather than centuries. But the race against time is also a race toward understanding. As artificial intelligence systems become more powerful and aerial sensing technology becomes more sophisticated, researchers are approaching the possibility of mapping the entire archaeological heritage of Amazonia, creating a digital monument to humanity's greatest experiment in sustainable civilization that will survive even if the physical sites do not. As the first rains of the wet season begin to fall across the Amazon basin, each droplet carrying with it the memory of countless cycles of evaporation and precipitation, the forest settles into its ancient rhythm of renewal and reflection. The mist that rises from warming earth seems to carry voices from another time, whispered conversations of peoples whose cities have become soil, whose monuments have become trees, whose civilization has become ecosystem. Standing in a clearing where LiDAR has revealed the geometric ghosts of earthworks hidden beneath centuries of forest growth, one cannot escape the sense that the boundary between past and present has become meaningfully blurred. The raised earth beneath your feet may have been shaped by human hands 1,000 years ago. The Brazil nut trees overhead were planted by peoples whose names are lost, but whose genetic selections continue to feed the forest. The very air carries spores and seeds whose distributions reflect trade networks that once connected the Caribbean to the Andes. The rain that begins to fall carries its own archaeological message. Each drop has traveled through the transpiration cycles of trees that may have grown from the foundations of vanished buildings. The water itself has been part of human-managed hydrological cycles for millennia, channeled through canal systems, collected in artificial lakes, and released through engineering works that turned the entire basin into a vast, coordinated water management system. As the rain intensifies, the forest's response reveals the depth of human partnership with natural processes. Streams appear along pathways that follow ancient causeways. Temporary lakes form in depressions that may have been designed as seasonal water storage systems. The forest drains and floods according to patterns that reflect not just natural topography, but the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who understood water not as a force to be controlled, but as a partner to be courted and guided. In the growing dusk, as the day's heat gives way to the cool breath of evening, the achievement of Amazonian civilization becomes clear. They solved the fundamental challenge that faces every human society: how to prosper without destroying the natural systems that support life. They did this not through dominance or extraction, but through such intimate partnership with their environment that their civilization literally grew itself, creating abundance by enhancing rather than depleting the ecological processes that sustain them. The breath that moves through the leaves around you is the exhalation of this ancient partnership oxygen produced by trees planted according to human design, moisture cycled through atmospheric rivers that indigenous engineers may have consciously enhanced, chemical signals that carry messages between plant communities that were shaped by human selection over millennia. As night falls and the forest settles into its nocturnal symphony, the whispers of the ancients seem to grow stronger. In the rustle of leaves, the call of night birds, the splash of river dolphins breathing at the surface, there are echoes of human voices raised in celebration of abundance rather than conquest of civilizations that built by growing rather than mining, of peoples who understood that the greatest monuments are made not of stone that crumbles, but of life that continues. The Amazon keeps their secrets, not as buried treasure waiting to be discovered, but as living wisdom available to any who learn to read the language of roots and rain, of soil and season, of the patient accumulation of life, building upon life in ever greater complexity and beauty. Perhaps this is their greatest gift to our troubled age, the knowledge that civilization and wilderness need not be enemies, that human prosperity and natural abundance can be mutually reinforcing, that the breath of the ancients still moves through the world, waiting for us to remember how to breathe in harmony with the living earth. If you felt the ancient pulse beating beneath the modern world's chaos, if these whispers from the Green Cathedral have stirred something in your soul, consider subscribing to continue this journey through the hidden histories that shape our world. The forest has many more secrets to share, and the breath of the ancients has stories that stretch from the Amazon's heartland to mysteries that span the globe.